The sun was bright that morning inside the grand white mansion on Banana Island, Lagos, Nigeria. Inside the compound, a poor, blind old woman in her 70s sat on the floor, weeping bitterly. A small bag lay beside her, torn and dusty from years of use. This was Mama George, blind, helpless, and heartbroken by the unfolding events. And standing in front of her with fierce eyes and a voice filled with bitterness was Adana, who told her, "You killed my daughter, didn't you?" Adana shouted angrily at the old woman. "You're a witch, a wicked old woman who eats her own blood," she accused harshly. Mama George gasped in shock. "Adana, I swear, on the grave of my husband," she pleaded desperately. "She was my only grandchild," she defended weakly. "Shut up," Adana screamed furiously, her face twisted in rage and pain. "You killed her while she was napping. And now my husband is dead, too. Your son is gone." With anger, Adana dragged Mama George's bag and threw it out the gate forcefully. "Leave, you can't live here anymore." "Not in my house," Adana commanded sternly. Tears streamed down Mama George's wrinkled face as she sat helplessly outside, her voice cracked with emotion. "Where do I go, Adana? I can't see. I have no one. I'm a widow. George was all I had," she whispered sadly. But Adana didn't care at all. Her heart had become hard like stone from grief. "I don't care where you go. Crawl to the streets," she replied coldly. "Never again," Adana declared firmly. She slammed the gate behind her, leaving Mama George in the scorching heat. The sun was getting hotter, beating down on the old woman's frail body. Mama George sat on the ground, her lips trembling as she whispered prayers softly. Loneliness, pain, rejection overwhelmed her completely in that moment of despair. Then, something happened unexpectedly. A strong breeze swept through the compound suddenly. The wind howled gently, stirring the leaves and dust around her. Suddenly, a figure appeared at the gate, standing tall and composed. It was a man, tall, dark, wearing a white shirt and black trousers neatly. He stepped out of a black SUV and stood quietly observing the scene. "Mama," the voice said softly, breaking the tense silence outside the gate. Mama George's ears perked up immediately. She blinked even though she couldn't see anything. That voice sounded familiar. No, it couldn't be, she thought in disbelief. "George," she whispered faintly, her heart racing with hope and confusion. Adana had just walked back out, holding her phone in her hand. She froze in her tracks, staring at the man in shock. Her eyes widened dramatically. Her mouth dropped open in utter astonishment. "I never died, Adna," he said calmly, explaining the situation briefly. "It was all a mistake. I survived the crash miraculously. I've been in hiding, healing, and watching everything from afar," and threw it at him desperately. "If you're a ghost, disappear," she screamed hysterically. But George didn't disappear at all. He moved closer, toward her steadily. "I'm real, Adana, very real," he affirmed without flinching. Adana stuttered nervously. "She's a witch. She killed our daughter," she defended weakly. "No," George thundered loudly, his voice echoing in the compound. "You're wrong. You've been blinded by pain and grief. Cynthia's death was a tragedy, a silent illness that crept into her sleep. And now you blame my mother, a 70-year-old blind widow, unjustly." He bent down beside his mother and held her hand gently for comfort. Mama George began to sob loudly, overwhelmed with joy and relief. My son, I thought I lost you too," she cried. Adana stood frozen in place. "I never thought you could be this cruel, Adana," he said disappointedly. Adana gasped in horror. "What are you saying?" she questioned desperately. George pulled out his phone from his pocket quickly. "I've already called my lawyer. I'm filing for divorce," he announced. "And everything. This estate, the cars, the business shares." "No, George, please," she begged, her voice breaking with regret. "You turned your pain into hate. You let the devil use your grief to destroy everything we had. You hurt the one woman who only ever loved us." He turned to the guards standing nearby. "Take Mama inside and bring her food immediately." Mama George was gently lifted and carried back into the mansion carefully. She fell to the ground, sobbing uncontrollably as the gate closed. Adana sat on a bamboo bench outside a small mud house, looking weary. Her feet were dusty, her hair undone, and her eyes swollen from crying constantly. Only the distant sound of a rooster crowing and a passing wheelbarrow broke the silence. Some stared curiously, others whispered among themselves about her story. "That's the woman who accused her blind mother-in-law of witchcraft," one girl said. Adana heard it all. She heard everything the villagers said about her. Even the old women at the stream spoke in hushed tones whenever she walked past. When she walked into her daughter's room and found Cynthia cold, lifeless in her bed. Cynthia had just turned 4 years old, full of life and energy. She was healthy. At least she looked healthy to everyone around. There had been no warnings, no signs of illness at all. And then she was gone forever, leaving a void in Adana's heart. Adana never recovered from that devastating loss of her child. Her heart turned to stone, hardening against the world around her. And the only person who seemed untouched by the tragedy was Mama George, blind.com, always muttering prayers in her quiet way. And she stopped listening to reason from anyone who tried to help. She wanted someone to blame for the unbearable pain she felt, and Mama George, so quiet, so helpless, became her target, unfortunately. George, her home, her dignity all gone because of her actions. She stared at the sky, searching for answers in the clouds above. "God, why didn't you stop me?" she whispered in desperation. Suddenly, a knock came at the wooden door behind her unexpectedly. It creaked open slowly, and an old man stepped out into the light. Papa Anio, her uncle, called her name gently to get her attention. "Adana," he said softly, approaching the bench where she sat. She stood and dusted her wrapper quickly out of respect. "Yes, uncle," she replied, turning to face him fully. He sat on a stool beside her and sighed deeply before speaking. "I just came back from town. I saw your friend Nena there. She said you've been trying to reach George desperately," he informed her. Adana nodded slowly, confirming what her friend had shared. "I've sent people. I even wrote letters. He hasn't replied at all." Papayos sighed again. "He's hurt deeply by what happened," he explained sympathetically. "But what about Mama George? That woman begged me many times to take care of you before you got married. She trusted you completely," he reminded her gently. "Adana, I know," Adana whispered, her voice filled with remorse and regret. "Pride won't help you here in this situation. You lost your daughter. That was painful beyond words, but you turned your pain into hate unnecessarily. You became someone else entirely," he observed sadly. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she listened to his words. "I've already tried everything I can think of. What more can I do now?" she asked helplessly. "Pray," he said simply, "and wait patiently for the right time." "Mama, this isn't about forgiveness alone," he argued. "It's about what's right and just in this situation. She threw away everything we built together as a family." George rubbed his forehead in frustration. "What are you saying exactly?" he asked. George turned quickly in surprise. "Mama, no," he protested immediately. "Everyone deserves a second chance in life," she stated wisely. He paused thoughtfully. The room went quiet as he considered her words. Mama George's hands reached out gently toward him in the silence. "You are not just my son. You are her husband too. And I know your heart, George. You still love her deeply. Get the convoy ready," he said into the phone. "We're going to the village right now." Her stomach rumbled with hunger. She had lost weight significantly. Her beautiful skin was now dry and rough from exposure, her fingers rough from house chores she performed daily. A young boy from the village market ran up to her excitedly. Auntie Adana, he shouted breathlessly to get her attention. "There's a convoy coming. Big cars, private guards," he reported eagerly. Adana stood up straight immediately. Her heart raced with anticipation and fear. Convoy? Could it be George? She wondered silently. The dust was rising in the air as a black Escalade slowly pulled in, followed by 2 Hilux vans, creating a spectacle in the quiet village. "What's going on? Is that the governor visiting us?" someone asked curiously. "No, it's George Adana's husband," another villager replied knowingly. The door of the black SUV opened slowly, revealing the visitors. And there he was, George, stepping out confidently, dressed in white Agbada eyes, calm but unreadable in expression. Then, Mama George stepped out behind him, holding his arm for support. Adana gasped loudly. She couldn't move from her spot. She couldn't speak a word. Was this a dream? She thought in disbelief. George looked straight at her with a steady gaze. "I came," he said simply, breaking the tense silence. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Mama," she apologized tearfully. George stepped forward toward her. She placed her hand gently on Adana's shoulder comfortingly. "My daughter," she said with a warm smile despite everything. "I know you were hurt deeply. I know grief can confuse the heart. I don't know what tomorrow will bring us," he said honestly. "But Mama says everyone deserves a second chance. Villagers clapped enthusiastically, moved by the reconciliation scene. Some cried tears of joy. Adana looked at George, then at Mama George gratefully. Hope filled her heart once more, bright and promising. Adana stood by the bedroom window of their mansion, watching the garden below peacefully. Everything looked the same as before, yet everything felt different now. It had been 3 weeks since George and Mama came to the village, and brought her back home to the mansion forgivingly. 3 weeks since she stepped foot in this house again after exile. 3 weeks since she felt safe, but also 3 weeks of healing slowly. She turned and looked around the room, taking in familiar sights, the cream-colored curtains, the soft white bed, the silver-framed photo. She walked to Cynthia's room and slowly pushed the door open cautiously. A soft knock came on the door behind her, interrupting her thoughts. She turned around. It was George standing there quietly. "Are you okay?" he asked gently, concerned for her well-being. Adana wiped her eyes quickly. George stepped closer to her. "I do too. Sometimes when you're asleep," he shared softly. "You weren't yourself at all," he said gently, understanding her struggle. "Grief does that to people sometimes," he added compassionately. "But I can't forget what I did to Mama," she whispered remorsefully. George sighed deeply. "She has forgiven you completely. That's what matters now. I don't deserve her forgiveness, or yours," Adana whispered humbly. She looked up at him hopefully. "I want to change," she said determinedly. "I want to be someone Cynthia would be proud of always." They both stood in silence, still holding hands in Cynthia's room. There was no music, no loud voices, just the sound of healing hearts quietly. In the days that followed, Adana began to change gradually and genuinely. Other days they simply sat in silence, sharing warmth and companionship. She no longer shouted at the house helps like before. She smiled at the driver warmly when he arrived. She helped the gardener carry tools without being asked. Something in her heart had truly shifted toward kindness and empathy. One afternoon, Mama George sat outside under a large umbrella comfortably, feeling the breeze on her skin in the pleasant weather. Adana brought her a bowl of fruit freshly prepared. "Mama, are you comfortable?" she asked caringly. "Yes, my daughter. Thank you," Mama George replied gratefully. Adana sat beside her on the bench. "Mama, can I ask you something important?" "Go on." Mama George encouraged her to speak freely. "That day when I dragged you out, when I called you those horrible names, I chased her away in anger," she admitted regretfully. "What happened after that?" Adana asked softly, curious about the story. "And I lived with the guilt for years, until I lost my sight. That's why I understood your anger and pain," Mama George continued gently. "But understanding is not the same as accepting wrongful actions." Adana fell to her knees and hugged Mama tightly with emotion. "I'm sorry." Mama George stroked her hair soothingly. "I know. That's why I brought you back home." 3 months passed quickly. The house grew warmer again with love and harmony. Smiles returned to everyone's faces. Laughter echoed in the halls once more. Then something unexpected happened that brought more joy. Adana missed her period, noticing the change in her body. But the second month came, and still no sign of it. 12 years had passed since the twins' birth. The once quiet mansion on Banana Island now echoed with laughter, footsteps, and the daily excitement of a busy family life. Sandra and Sarah, George and Adana's twin daughters, had grown into intelligent women. They had their father's sharp mind and their mother's strong heart undeniably. Wherever they went, they moved like light, gentle, but impossible to ignore. From a very young age, both girls had shown unusual brilliance and curiosity, while other children played with dolls and crayons innocently. Sandra and Sarah often asked deep questions about the human body and how medicine worked to heal people effectively. "I want to heal people like Jesus did," Sarah once told Mama George at age 5. "And I want to find a way to make people never feel pain," Sandra added enthusiastically. Their dreams never faded as they grew older and wiser. At school, they topped every class consistently with high grades. Their teachers were amazed by how humble they remained despite brilliance, and their father's wealth providing them with every advantage possible. "Mama taught us something," Sandra once told a reporter after winning Second Chance, "is only worth it if you use it to lift others." And that's exactly what they did with their talents and opportunities. Now, at age 24, Sandra and Sarah were full-fledged medical doctors. They had just returned from a medical mission in Kenya successfully, and were invited to speak at a global health conference in Port Harcourt. Adana stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her elegant blue wrapper carefully. Her silver earrings shimmered in the sunlight that streamed through the window. George walked in, fixing the cuff of his white senator wear neatly. "You look stunning," he said with a proud smile on his face. Adana blushed slightly. "You say that every time I wear this wrapper." "Because it's true every time," he replied charmingly. "From that little hospital bed to a global stage," she marveled. George nodded affirmatively. "They're living proof of grace and perseverance." Adana turned and held his hand tightly. "George, thank you for that day in the village, for bringing me back home despite everything," she said gratefully. "I did it because Mama asked me to," he admitted honestly. "But today I'm glad I listened to her wisdom." Later that afternoon, the grand conference hall in Port Harcourt was packed. Lights flashed, cameras rolled, doctors, researchers, and students sat eagerly. The MC announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our next speakers, Dr. Sandra and Dr. Sarah George," he introduced enthusiastically. Applause thundered as the twins walked to the podium confidently, dressed in matching white coats, soft makeup, and calm smiles on their faces. Sandra spoke first into the microphone. "We stand here not just as medical doctors, but as daughters who were given a second chance at life, through the power of love, forgiveness, and family," she stated proudly. Sarah continued seamlessly. "Our journey began in pain, but it was shaped by the people who chose to believe in redemption rather than revenge." Behind the stage, George and Adana sat in the front row attentively, hand in hand, tears welling in their eyes from pride. Adana reached into her handbag and pulled out a folded paper. It was a drawing, faded, fragile from years of preservation. Cynthia's old sketch of their family drawn in crayon lovingly. Adana placed the paper over her heart, gently with emotion. "I wish she could see them now," she whispered sadly. George gently placed his hand over hers for comfort. "She does. Every time they smile," he reassured softly. After the conference, reporters surrounded the family eagerly for interviews. Cameras flashed brightly. "Dr. Sandra, how did your family shape your path to medicine?" Sandra looked at her mother warmly. "Because I saw what pain did to our family, and how healing brought us back together stronger. I wanted to help others find healing, too," she explained passionately. Sarah nodded in agreement. "Mama and Papa taught us never to run from our past, but to grow from it. That's why we are who we are today." The next weekend, the family returned to Lagos after the successful conference. Preparations were underway for another milestone in their lives. The twins were getting married to their chosen partners soon. Sandra had fallen in love with Dr. Johnson, a brilliant pediatrician. She met him during her residency training in the hospital. Sarah, on the other hand, had met Maxwell, a biomedical engineer, during a workshop on vaccine development that they both attended. Both men were kind, respectful, and adored the girls deeply. The mansion buzzed with activity as the wedding approached. Tailors, decorators, chefs, everyone had a job to do efficiently. But in the middle of it all sat Mama George calmly. She sat quietly in her rocking chair, smiling contentedly. Mama George chuckled lightly. "And you think I don't know that already?" Wedding day arrived with great anticipation and joy for everyone. The venue sparkled beautifully under the lights and decorations. Glass chandeliers, white orchids, a long red carpet lined with golden petals. The ocean breeze danced softly through the air, adding freshness. As drums played and singers raised their voices melodiously, the moment came for the brides to walk down the aisle. George stood proudly in a deep navy agbada with silver embroidery.